This week, we are once again in the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, and Jesus is continuing with parables. Throughout this chapter, Jesus tells 4 parables, in fact, all of which begin, "The kingdom of heaven is like," and all of which are a little bit different. Last week, Jesus told us a parable wherein the kingdom of heaven is like a sower that sowed seed on paths and rocky soil and thorny soil and good soil. What an image! The Son of God sowing across all of the cosmos, that is, all of the world, all of the days of our lives, the good, the bad, and the other. That is to say, our days that may feel rocky or thorny or other. Today's "The Kingdom of Heaven is Like" parable is about a harvest, one that was planted, though weeds sprung up, so that at the point of harvest there needs to be a separation between the two, weeds and wheat. Tucked into the midst of today's reading, in those 5 verses that are conveniently omitted, are 2 other parables. The kingdom of heaven being like a mustard seed, and also like yeast used in 60 pounds of dough, though we will address those on another day. I mention them here because, like the 4 Gospels themselves, the 4 parables in this chapter of Matthew's Gospel show differing truths about the kingdom of heaven, truths that we can learn a great deal from when we sit with them, and also great truths we can see when we look at all 4 together, giving us a wider view than any one singular parable. But on to our parable for the day. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but then something else sows in weeds. Now, this presents our dilemma. Do we pull the weeds now, or do we pull them later? Now might upset the crops at hand, though later allows them to stick around. I think it's important to note here the truth that we do not pick the weeds. That is the job of the reapers, the angels, and that is a very good thing. Because, to lean into this metaphor, I personally cannot tell the difference between weeds and wheat or grass or any plant for that matter. I mean, in front of my house, I built a planter during COVID. It's about 8 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep. When I built it, my thought was to plant all the herbs that I love to use to cook, but hate buying, things like basil and cilantro, etc. To be honest, I never planted any. So instead of a garden, I ended up with a wild patch in my planter, or as I try to artistically refer to it, my natural growth plot. Now, I think that this is an important oversight because people assume when reading this parable, and later on in Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus is talking about the separation of sheep and goats, we tend to put ourselves in the role of the separator, or the reaper, etc., when that act is always the job of either the angels sent by Jesus or Jesus himself. In this parable, we are the slaves of the household. We are the ones who ask the question, do you want us to go out and gather the weeds? And Jesus' answer is no. No. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers what to do. So again, separating or casting away is simply not our job. Though more importantly is the question, what is the relationship between wheat and weed in our lives? In the parable, it seems simple. There is wheat and there are weeds. Wheat is good, weeds are bad. One is kept and the other is burned. But how does that work for the days of our lives? For some insight into this, let's consider a teaching of Martin Luther, who wrote that we as people are both saints and sinners at all times. We are saints because we are washed in the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ, and forgiven in the act of the cross. Yet we are also sinners who manage to stumble, err, and fall short of God's potential for our lives with almost every decision we make. And these two things happen concurrently. We are loved and washed clean by Christ, and yet we fail of our own volition. We stray from God's intent, falling prey to our sinful nature, and find ourselves sorrowful and repenting. Consider worship. We come into worship, we confess, and we are forgiven. Yet the next week we come back, not because the previous week's forgiveness didn't take, but because we continue to be sinners. We continue to sin and receive that grace of God as forgiven sinners. So when we consider the wheat and the weeds through this idea of saints and sinners, we are both wheat and weeds concurrently. If we consider this parable like we thought about last week's parable, and I'll remind you that last week I asked the question, how do we change from rocky soil to thorny soil or to good soil? This week, we have to ask the question, how could or how do we change from weed to wheat? Or if the rocky, the thorny, and the good soil represented our good days and our bad days, and we have weed days and wheat days, I really hope that the end of the age, the end of the world, happens on a wheat day in my life and not a weed day. The point I'm aiming for here is the complexity of our human lives in regards to this binary idea that the good are taken and the bad are burned by a consuming fire. Though this brings us to what I think is the most beautiful and powerful image in this parable. Verse 42 reads, "And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, I've always read this verse thinking that the weeds, the evil ones, are weeping and gnashing their teeth because they are in the fire. But what if those that are weeping are the angels who were sent to reap, because part of God's creation is being consumed in the fire? Do you remember how this parable started? The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. A reminder of Genesis, when after creating each thing, God said, "It is good." And yet, in this parable, it ends with an image of angels incinerating parts of that good creation, which brings them to tears. What if the kingdom of heaven is like a restored paradise that weeps and gnashes its teeth if even one part of the creation is not there? Friends, that is exactly why Christ was sent, to save the world. That is to say, to save the cosmos, to save all of creation. It's why heaven is filled with the joy of the angels' song and not the sting of their bitter tears. Because at our core, we are both saints and sinners, perfectly imperfect and perfectly redeemed by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the kingdom of heaven is like a place where the angels would cry and gnash their teeth if people were missing. But because of the power of Jesus Christ, because of the love of God that is stronger than our doubt, stronger than sin, and stronger than our existence, they do not have to. Friends, this is the good news of Jesus Christ that we share so that all may know him, so that all may know there is a place in the heavens and in the church of Jesus Christ for all of our wheat and weed days and all of our wheat and weed brothers and sisters. There is a place to come and to celebrate that no fire is needed. So without that worry of tomorrow, we can help, care, and love one another today. Amen.